teach us the concept, the idea of citta, the nature of the mind.
Okay, first of all, I would like to, it's really difficult not to use, to draw from the Pali language, because the Pali language, this is the language that the Buddha used. Actually, it's not known as Pali, it's Magadhi. Pali comes from Sri Lanka. It's a moniker, it means language of the text. This came about many years later. So the Buddha spoke a dialect that was easily accessible to all other speakers. The Brahmins they used the Sanskrit. You must be educated to use this language. The Dhamma's for everybody. High class, low class, no caste, whatever. But Pali is so unique because it has all these concepts already in it. For example, the mind. We do not need a big, long discourse just to understand the concept in the Pali language. But now, unfortunately, we do not know about the Pali language, so we have to have a big, long discourse for these, to describe these terms. I think the best description of the mind is in the Abhidhamma, to refresh your minds. Abhidhamma is the third basket in Theravada Buddhism. You have the Vinaya, you have the monastic rules, you have the Dhamma, you have the Vinaya Pitaka, you have the Dhamma Pitaka. That's all of the discourses of the Buddha concerning the 84,000 topics. And you have the Abhidhamma. This word Dhamma, I've seen it, sometimes they translate it as dogma. Well, I don't know how they get dogma out of this, but many different translations. One would be nature. One would be teaching of the Buddha. So the prefix abhi means great, the great teaching. So actually in the suttas, you have some conventional realities. But the Abhidhamma is the description of absolute realities. And one of those realities is the mind, citta. Because in the suttas, yes, we have conventional us. This is my conventional self. But this is only true to a certain extent. In the absolute context, we are grouping of various different things. For example, you have nama and rupa. Nama is the abstract, and rupa is the concrete. But even in the concrete, you have different things. It's not just one thing. For example, your body. You are made up of the 4 elements. Earth, water, fire, and air. Not just one thing. The nama, the citta, this is a natural truth. It's like a flowing. It's like this, we can compare it to the internet, the flow of this information, or we can compare it to a river. Very much like what Heraclitus said, you cannot step in the same river twice. We have the same thing. Buddha said it first. But this is very difficult because some of these things are taught in relation to something else. For example, the self. Is there a true self? Is there a true me? Conventionally, according to the Buddha, yes, there is, but not absolutely. Because everything is changing, millisecond by millisecond. So we have the citta, we have the 6th sense base, the eye, the ears, the nose, the tongue, the body. So in the Abhidhamma, according to the Abhidhamma, you have this flow of consciousness. But during this flow, you have input through the 6 senses. So the eye sees an object, that goes to the mind. There will be some action, some reaction, the ear, the nose, the tongue, and so on. And each of these will have an action and reaction. So we can divide these down to positives and negatives and neutral action, neutral things. Or we can use terms such as wholesome and unwholesome. But we really can't do justice to the Abhidhamma just in a few minutes. It's something very difficult and very deep. But for me, it has the perfect explanation of all this phenomena that's happening every millisecond. So we have this phenomena that we call mind that we experience. So the teaching of the Buddha is directed towards doing away with unwholesome action and developing wholesome action. So we have the precepts, that's doing away with unwholesome bodily unwholesome action. We have 3 different types of action, or we can call them 3 doors. The body door, the speech door, and the mind door. So the precepts that we talked about at the beginning of our discussion, this would be the body and speech. Then the meditation is used to develop the mind door. Even if we don't do some unwholesome act through body and speech, we are still creating unwholesome acts through the mind door. And then the opposite is true. The negative side, we have lobha, dosa, moha. We have greed, anger, and delusion as the impetus for these actions. Then we have the opposite. We have non-greed, non-anger, non-delusion as actions in themselves. So in a general sense, the mind is a natural truth. But it is this truth that, but because of defilements, we are in this cycle of cause and effect, reaping and sowing and then reaping again. But it is the mind that realizes the truth of Nibbana. Nibbana is an unmade, unbecome, unformed truth. But it is not a plane, it is not a place, it's not a heaven. It's a natural liberation from suffering. And this is what the Buddha discovered. This is what all Buddhas discover. And the teaching in the Abhidhamma, we have, touching on what your question, we have intent. The Buddha teaches that karma is intent, is intention. So where there is no intent, there is no karma. But we're always creating. Even if we're not creating physically, we're creating mentally. There's a massive amount of things. And this is what affects us. And this is how we can also use this teaching to develop ourselves. We don't have to be pacified with what we have now. I only have such and such amount of compassion. You don't have to be pleased with just that amount. You can develop this more. If you know about it, you can develop it. That's the whole point of the Dhamma. That's the whole point of the teaching of Buddha, self-development. But this citta is impermanent, and in the Abhidhamma is divided down to milliseconds. They're called jetasikas. Things, and it's so fast. We can divide them down to milliseconds. And these jittas will be either positive or negative. See, in Western science, they try to describe the mind as something maybe static, And then there's this question of soul. But whenever we meditate, we see the mind as it truly is, how fast it is. It is nothing but a mass amount of positive and negative arisings and passings away.